Howdy, everybody. It's me, John Solano. If this is one of the first times you've looked at one of my videos, um, to keep it short, all I can tell you is that I'm a professional counselor. I've been for over 30 years, and over the last decade, I've been providing family therapy for families who are in high levels of conflict. And so, as I go about my day, both professionally and personally, I'm very interested in what's going on in society and kind of how that connects uh, to us as human beings at a psychological level. So, one of the things, of course, that is a hot topic and has been for, I want to say many years, but actually, through history, has been the topic of discrimination. Right? So right now, of course, there's lots of protests and riots going on based upon what people would say would be racial discrimination, um, or other forms of discrimination. Right? So this has been something that society has been wrestling with for a long, long time. All parts of society in all parts of the world. Whenever something persists, as long as for a long time, and as long as this issue of discrimination has persisted, it always gets me a little bit curious, um, or it gives me the feeling that there is something about this topic, this issue, that is deeply embedded in the human psyche. Now, as a professional counselor, what I often do when I'm working with people is that I invite people into different perspectives. This is part of my background as a sports coach as well, where I invite people into a different position. Because it's from where somebody positions themselves that they get a view of the world. And a lot of people just are in the wrong position. So as a coach, I'm constantly inviting people to make shifts in their position. That's not always easy to do because people are often very invested in their current position. So as much as people say they want to change, oftentimes they really don't, or it can be very difficult. All right. But I am inviting people to see things differently. So one of the things that I've become aware of, I guess you could say, and I wanted to toss it out there to you to see if it makes any sense, is now think about this. Now, probably over the last decade or so, kind of in the field of psychology and other areas, what's become a very popular topic is the idea of attachment, and with that, relationship. But when we talk about attachment theory, we're really talking about one of the most fundamental issues about who we are as human beings. As human beings, we spend the first, parts of our lives pretty vulnerable. In fact, when we're born, we can't survive in our world unless we start to attach. One could say that's why a baby immediately has a sucking response and what else? A grasping response. So a baby must grasp onto something and get nutrition in order to survive. Attachment theory, or the word attachment, isn't warm and fuzzy. It's not called bonding theory, it's called attachment theory. And attachment is not a warm fuzzy word. And the reason for that is because it's all about survival. So when you think about who we are as human beings, at the very most fundamental kind of facets of who we are, it has to be about survival. Survival of our very life. It's a life and death issue in order to connect and to attach. Now, here's a little bit of a formula that I've worked out around attachment. Is that, when attachment, again, like I said, is very mechanical. It's not warm and fuzzy. However, attachment theory says that if a child's or an infant's caregivers are nurturing and caring and emotionally and physically stable and present, and adoring and all these things, then the child begins to, I guess you could say, figure out that the world is not as scary as it thought. that the world is kind of a friendly place and that they have some value. So this is how we learn whether or not we have value, by how our caregivers and our environment responds to us. But just to say, that interaction with our children is very, what I call, sensual, right? Because it's all about the five senses. It's all about the five senses. And we spend a lot of time with our infants and toddlers and children at a very close physical proximity. So we're bathing our children, we're feeding our children, we're holding our children, we're cuddling, we're doing all sorts of stuff, very physical, very sensual. Our words are soft and etc. So very sensual, and the senses are taking in all this information. Now, if it all goes well, that information being taken in, I guess you could say, gets translated into that what's going on is pleasurable. So when we start to experience pleasure as human beings, what kicks in? Oxytocin, right? Oxytocin then becomes the warm, fuzzy, or gives us that warm, fuzzy feeling. So when that chemical fires up in our brain, we get a warm, fuzzy feeling. That warm, fuzzy feeling, of course, we as human beings, and especially as little human beings, we're very, I guess you could say, attracted to that. We want more of that. So that becomes the bonding. Now, oxytocin is also flowing for the adults. So when we hold babies and we spend time with babies and our children, hopefully for us as adults, that's also a source of pleasure. So oxytocin is flowing in both the infant and the adult, causing them to bond. Okay, so whenever you see bonding, watch what little kids do. And this is really the important part. Little kids start to want to possess. They start to become exclusive, or they start to demonstrate exclusivity. What does that mean? Well, that means that the baby child starts to bond. It starts to, seek out, if you will, its immediate family and others in that little community. And it starts to say, this is my mommy, this is my daddy, this is my brother, this is my sister, this is my family. You see what happens there? That attachment, as it evolves, starts to turn into this exclusivity. Now, what happens if someone from the outside of that group, that family, tries to come in? It distresses the child. So in other words, this child has become discriminatory. This child has learned to discriminate between people in its group, in its family, and people who are not. You see, this is how deep this goes within us. Now, like I said, the whole attachment theory thing and relationship theory, if you will, is very popular right now. But there are some, what do you want to call it, kind of curses almost, challenges that go with it. And this is one of the challenges, is that we grow up, we got to accept this, that we grow up in our immature state as needing to be part of a clan, part of a tribe, something exclusive, an exclusive group. And consequently, as we spend time with this group, we become discriminatory. We discriminate against other people. Now, I know that word has taken on a bad tone, a bad flavor at this point, in years past. But can you see what I'm saying here is that we learn to discriminate. We need to learn to discriminate in order to survive. That's how deeply embedded it is. It's part of our attachment. Now, or our need to attach. Science, I guess you could say, and further psychological research has, I guess you could say, even validated that even further, that we're social animals, that we need to have contact, not just with other people, but with other people that we somehow, I guess you could say, want to be around. There's an old saying, right? Birds of a feather, flock together. That's just one of many sayings that indicates that that we like to hang out with people who we have um, commonalities with. How would we know if we have commonalities with them? Because, excuse me, because we've been discriminatory. We've been discriminating. I look at somebody, I see how they conduct themselves, what they look like, etc., what age they are, and somewhere within me, there's some matching that goes on. I think, okay, well, this would be somebody I want to spend time with. So I discriminate. I bring certain people into my circle, and other people are excluded. Okay? Now, the rest of that little formula that I often use is there's exclusivity. And then right after that, there's loyalty. So it starts out as attachment, goes to bonding. The relationship then becomes exclusive. Now, don't and discriminatory. Now, again, don't get me wrong. That dynamic occurs for even adults, right? When you see adults start to go into relationship, especially romantic relationships, right? They become exclusive. When I was a kid, we used to say to each other, "Would you like to go steady?" Would you like to be that steady couple? Would you like to become a couple? Well, what happens when you become a couple? What happens when you become exclusive? Well, everybody else is excluded. That's part of the deal. Because when you move up that ladder, if you will, from attachment to bonding, bonding also requires risk. And so you really got to be careful as to who you bring into your circle, because it's a risky thing. So you have to discriminate. So again, you see how common, how normal it is? We do it all the time. Maybe you attend a support group, or maybe you attend a book club, or maybe you belong to a sports team. You know, you're on that team, if you will, because you've made some choices. You've been discriminatory. You've been, you exercise your right to discriminate as to who you want to be with, and etc. And so you start to hang out with these people, and lo and behold, you're going to start to bond, and you're going to start to become tribal. This is the other thing. Tribalism. This is where the attachment, bonding, exclusivity, and above that, loyalty is the next step. That's where you start to see, right, tribal behavior. So, what's the problem with that? I'm not sure that there is. I know that we all know that there's a healthy kind of grouping that people do, and an unhealthy kind of grouping that people do. But we do form groups. We do form tribes. Even if you want to just call it your group of friends, or your family, or whatever, but can you see how deeply that is in the human psyche, in the human development, in the human developmental experience? It's absolutely necessary. You can't get rid of it. We are discriminating by nature because we need to survive, because bonding is risky. And of course, there are other benefits to being part of a group, to being part of a tribe, to being part of your family, right? I mean, if you're part of a family, there are certain privileges that you all have that you wouldn't extend to anybody else. So in other words, let's say you're part of a family and you happen to be a son or a daughter. Do you have to make an appointment 3 months in advance to come home and see your parents? No. Or if you're younger and you're still living at home, you probably have a key, or you have a code. Not everybody has that privilege or gets that privilege. So now see, people talk about discrimination and talk about privilege. And both of those things are part of the basic nature of human beings, because we are attachment driven, right? And relationship driven. That's what the data points to. So the next piece in I guess you could say, in that kind of attachment idea. So we've got attachment, bonding, exclusivity, loyalty, and then the next piece is sacrifice. Those are the 5 stages that I have been able to isolate, that I have been able to extract when I'm doing my family counseling, and I walk into a living room of people, and one of the things I can look at right away is, what's the level of sacrifice going on? If dad asks son to mow the lawn today and son has plans with friends, is son willing to give up plans with friends or to delay plans with friends in order to keep a commitment to the family? If that isn't happening, I know that something's gone wrong somewhere in this. There could be disrupted attachment. There isn't a strong bond. Something happened there. But when things go well, that's how it moves along. That's how it develops. So I'm going to leave it there because I don't want to make this too long. I wanted to offer you a different position on the idea of discrimination and now as well privilege. I hope that you have gotten some understanding, or at least you kind of get where I'm going with this, around the very, very basics, the very, very fundamentals of who we are as human beings. It's in our biology to survive. It's in our great capacity. I say great capacity because we, if I could say this, of all the mammals or what have you, have the biggest brains, the most executive functioning. Like, we are very, very good at discriminating. Why? Well, we spend a lot of our lives vulnerable as infants, as toddlers, as children. We learn how to discriminate. That's not a bad thing. So I'll leave it there because this really can be unpackaged in some other directions. It needs to be. But the blue smoke and mirrors here, the red herring, is to think that we can get rid of it. You see, this is what I said earlier. When there's a certain phenomena that persists over and over and over again, let me just give you an example of a couple other things that persist. Let me give you an example of one that's attached to the attachment idea. That's addiction. That's addiction. I'm going to leave that there, but think about it. What is addiction? I call it hyperattachment. Instead of a substance use disorder, it could be hyperattachment disorder. All right? What's another thing? Trauma. The reason I bring that one up is because, well, addiction and trauma has always been in our society. And yet so much of our society believes that it should not be here. I mean, how much money, how much energy do we put into trying to get rid of addiction, as if it shouldn't exist, as if it can be eradicated? Same thing with trauma. Since the beginning of time, these things have existed, and they have not gone away despite everybody's best efforts. There's a reason for that, because it's deeply, deeply embedded in the psyche and in the human experience. Almost what we would call archetypal. Okay? So, same thing for this idea of discrimination and privilege. We won't be able to get rid of it because of how deeply embedded it is, but we can begin to shift our positions on it. We can begin to work with it differently. But again, watch that red herring to think that we can get rid of it, because all you're going to get out of that is absolute exhaustion and frustration, a sense of futility and hopelessness. And that's often what people are experiencing. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't take a look at it, do something about it, but let's first realize what we're dealing with. All right, I hope this has been helpful. Have a good day.